Welcome to Good Revenue. I'm Neetha Bidway, and this week we're going to talk about why energy bills are about to spike, how fake used cars are flooding global markets, why a tech giant might have just saved publishers, how Europe is making regulation a little easier on the little guy, but a lot harder on giants, and finally, the dollar is crashing to 50-year lows. As always, thank you so much for joining us. And if you've never been here before, we would love it if you'd hit the subscribe button. We're a small show and it makes a huge difference and helps more people find us. You can find links and resources to everything we talk about in the show notes. Thanks for joining us. Congress killed the clean energy sector to pay for tax cuts in a massive piece of legislation that was passed last week and has just been signed into law. And so energy bills are going to be more expensive in all 50 states. And here is some of the data. The law itself effectively gutted clean energy tax cuts. So that affects solar power, wind energy, and battery technology. A lot of projects that were in the works may get a little bit of a reprieve for a short period of time, about a year. But in general, developers are expected to make massive cuts to projects. And even where there are some sunk costs, some money's already been spent, those projects are going to get killed. The problem for us here is, regardless of whether or not you love clean energy or you're a fossil fuel kind of person, it doesn't really matter. In the United States, we are super lucky. We have a portfolio of energy options. We're energy independent, and we have been for a long time. So most of that new generation has actually come from clean energy. It's been 90% of power generation in recent years. What we're talking about now is the loss of 340 gigawatts of energy. That is a massive amount, and I think some context is really helpful. That's actually 3 times the power generation of the state of California. It's more than the Northeast grid and the Midwest grid combined. So it's a huge, huge amount of power. And I don't think that politics should come into the consideration of this at all, because the real question is, do we want the lights to turn on when we flip a switch? And I think the answer for the vast majority of us is yes, that would ideally be great. And we're also pretty lucky in that, in general, energy is pretty inexpensive in the US. So when our bills go up significantly, when costs go up for our manufacturers and employers, it has huge downstream effects that we're all going to share in, regardless of what we think about that legislation or anything else that's happening this year. Here's some of the data about what's going to happen based on this policy change. First of all, the average household will expect to pay $130 more by 2030. It may go up to $400 more for some households over the next decade. In addition, wholesale prices are likely going to jump as much as 74% by 2035. The challenge also, we have 2 big challenges that we're facing as a part of this too, that I think are helpful to just keep in mind. One, and we talked about this about 2 weeks ago on our energy episode, we have huge record amounts of demand on energy right now. And that's being driven largely by AI and by data centers. AI is on track to exceed the capacity of the energy of Japan in just a few years. That's like a huge amount of energy if we do nothing else. The other challenge is that China has quietly and efficiently become a huge leader in clean energy production. They actually own 700,000 patents, according to the New York Times, in clean energy. And they are also going to be on track to hit about 60% of new global renewables capacity by 2030. So that's a lot of energy, and it's a huge market that we're effectively just giving up. So you can hear the disappointment in my voice as I say that, because I just think that we've been a leader in so many sectors, and it is just so unfortunate that we couldn't find a way to make this work and to dominate another sector that's going to be really important to our economy and the global economy in the coming decades. Speaking of China, there's something odd happening when it comes to used car sales globally. China has been exporting a lot of fake used cars, and you might wonder what that actually means. It means there are new cars being labeled and sold as used cars, but these are cars that have never been driven, according to Car Scoops and reporting from Reuters. There are 436,000 of these used cars, and they're mostly being dumped into markets in the Middle East, in Central Asia, and in Russia. Now, it's a nice deal if you're a consumer in those markets because they're less expensive and there's a lot of them. But this may cause problems for both China and for other competitors in the auto industry globally. If this continues or expands, this could crash auto prices, which obviously is a huge concern to automakers globally. And it may be an extinction level event for US jobs, especially if those cars end up in US markets or in markets where American automakers are competing. Now, you might not know this, but China has actually become the top global exporter of vehicles. It used to be Japan, but in 2023, China surpassed them. The US is actually just the sixth largest exporter of vehicles. And a lot of that is because we're a net importer. We import more cars than anyone in the world. So while American workers are keeping an eye on this, and companies like Ford are always keeping a very close eye on the competition when it comes to automakers in China, it's a really complicated sector. There's a lot of government support for both innovation and manufacturing and production, and a lot of competing incentives between the central government and the local economies. What had been happening is that local economies across China had been subsidizing and incentivizing these car exports because it kept a lot of people employed and it kept production lines busy. But this has, at the end, maybe not been as productive as the central government is trying to rein in some of that aggressive behavior. And now it's potentially raising a lot of concern on the part of foreign competitors too. So like many issues in Asia, China's a huge market and a huge producer. And as they are trying to grow and change and evolve, some of their choices and tactics in markets don't always go over well within those markets, and other firms, whether they're American or from other countries, also tend to get in the crosshairs sometimes. So we'll see what happens with that one. Next story. There is one company that controls 20% of global internet traffic. That company is called Cloudflare, and they have decided to block AI bots by default. Now, if you're a publisher hosting your site on Cloudflare, they're a CDN, you're probably delighted by this because this means that tech companies and AI firms are going to actually have to negotiate with you if they want to crawl your site. The tech that Cloudflare has just launched as of July is going to block all AI bots by default. Publishers will be able to charge for access, so either they get paid or AI bots get blocked. That might actually shake loose this fight we've been talking about for the last several months between IP holders and copyright holders and AI and tech companies. For the last 20 years, tech has really not paid publishers anything and has been freely crawling all of these websites. Publishers' business models have suffered, and a lot of companies have gone out of business. We talked about this in last week's episode 2 when we discussed the collapse in media trust and in media businesses. So understandably, publishers like Time and Condé Nast are thrilled about this. There's no comment yet from the tech firms, but we'll keep a close eye to see if this changes the trajectory and tenor of negotiations between those stakeholders. And at the same time, we're also keeping an eye on some of the IP and copyrights cases that we've talked about, starting with Thomson Reuters back in February. And most recently, there was a ruling that was favorable to Anthropic. That's a tech company, the maker of Claude. So we'll be curious to see what comes out of all of that. The EU just made some changes to make it easier for small firms to comply with GDPR. They just raised their employee threshold from 250 employees to 750 employees. This will affect about 38,000 companies, and it's expected to save about 400 million euros annually for small firms largely based in the EU. Now, if you're a large firm, you are still subject to all the requirements under GDPR. And if you're a smaller firm, but you engage in what the EU defines as high risk data processing, you also have to meet all the requirements of GDPR. In addition, the EU is rolling out some new policy changes in September of this year, and they're also working on an AI Act. There's a host of new requirements for cybersecurity and AI, and we've talked a little bit about some of these in a couple prior episodes, so we will link to those here too. The thing that I think is helpful about this at the end of the day is that they are trying to find a way to make the regulatory burden easier on small firms, which I think is always a popular choice. And they're keeping the pressure up on giants. So depending on your perspective on whether or not we need to regulate privacy and what the standards should be for tech companies or AI firms or banks or any other larger entity, this is one to keep a close eye on. Our final story, the dollar is at its lowest point since 1953. It is down 10% since the start of the year. And in that same period of time, the euro is up 13%. Investors are hedging their bets when it comes to the dollar as well, for the first time in a long time, because the dollar, being the global reserve currency, hasn't really needed to be something that you had to hedge in the past. But these days, given inflation and the fact that Congress just passed that huge bill we talked about at the top, investors are feeling a little nervous globally. Speaking of Congress and the administration, there are still some serious threats about new tariffs. The latest 25% tariffs are being threatened against Japan and South Korea. If those go into effect, it would be August 1st. The administration seems to be frustrated about the pace of trade negotiations, but at the same time, even in the framework deals that have been announced, it really doesn't seem like a lot of progress has been made from everything that we've seen and been sharing with you. So it'll be interesting to see if there's something specific they're trying to get in both of these deals that they think is realistic in the next 3 weeks. In addition, Washington is also putting pressure on countries that might want to ally with BRICS. That is another alliance of countries. And so the rate and scale of these economic choices and geopolitical consequences continues to be really severe. And I'm sure there will be some unintended consequences that we can't even foresee as of right now, but it hasn't been dull yet. So we hope you have a really good week, and we will see you here soon. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, leave us a review, subscribe to the show, or check out another episode. We appreciate your support.